Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in this discussion focusing on the 11th chapter of the book, Jesus in Our Days. So, if we keep on going, as you can see, we started the second half of the book. And I just wanted to quickly remind all of you that the psychological series, which was written by the spiritual author Joanna de Angelis in collaboration with Divaldo, Pereira, Franco, is truly a powerful and impactful group of books. I am here to say how honored I am to be able to present to you some of the main ideas found in this book. And again, the intent of the series is to discuss, to bring or shed some light into very insightful messages contained in the first book of the series. As you can see, Jesus in Our Days, and I've been mentioned this before, is a very small book, and it is very, very dense. There's so much information that you can just unpack together, and I appreciate you being with me on this journey. But as we deep dive into this teachings, we we just keep thinking of ourselves. We are so touched, and we come up for air right after we immerse back again in this metaphor, and it just they touch us, they impact us, and they make us keep thinking about it. And this is just, I would say, a preamble to many more teachings that we'll find as we go through this entire series together. I invite you to welcome Jesus in your life and understand that he addresses many challenging situations. And today, is another one of those. So, in any case, as you can see, we are halfway through on our 11th of the 20 chapters. And the first time that we, just first discussion that we're going to go through is very interesting. As you can see here, I put the title of excuses because to me, we have to look at, yes, resolve, right? Resolve and excuses. How do they counter to each other? So as we start, and this is Jesus' time, um, this young man comes to Jesus and, right, he asks Jesus if he could follow him. And Jesus just proposed a very direct, invitation. No ifs or what's abouts. And in spite of this just eagerness, yes, I want to follow you, Jesus, the young man just used an excuse. It was a very important one, right? Master, I'm sorry, but I have to bury my father who deceased, and then I'll follow you. And this brings about a series of discussions that we're going to be together, right? So when Jesus listens to that, and it's a controversial line in the Bible, when he hears that, sorry, I can't do that yet because I have this commitment. I have to bury my father who just died. He just comes back and he says, leave to the dead the care of burying their dead, but you construct the kingdom of God in your heart. Right. So I think it's important for us to just spend a second or two in this. Number one, is this the most important thing for him to do? Right. It is death or is it life? Is it bearing or is it opening to light? And so, in the next few minutes, we're going to go over the aspects of this is the passage. That's all it is. And my thought was, first of all, what are our immediate responses to this passage? For me, the immediate response was surprise and even shock. Jesus would say that to me? Isn't I think it's the fifth commandment that we find in the Old Testament, Exodus, honor our father and mother. How could he say otherwise? In Matthew, for example, Matthew chapter 12, 48 to 50, we have another reference that is equally shocking for many, and we can talk about it later. I'm not going to spend more time here, but it just a point and counterpoint to this. Number one, we have a commandment that says, "Thou shalt honor your father and mother." On the other hand, Jesus says, yeah, you don't need to let other people deal with this because it's just a dead body, and we have to understand from a reincarnationist perspective that Jesus was spot on, right? It's just the body. What is so necessary for you as a son, as a daughter, to follow? Is it the teachings? Is it the other types of legacies, or taking care of life from a material perspective? But I'm getting myself ahead. The second one that is said is Matthew, who says. Right? People asked Jesus. It was a packed, full packed people, a room full of people, and he says, "Jesus, your mother and your brothers are there," and he says, "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers?" And everybody gets really upset because, as we can tell, Mary, Mother Jesus, is a beloved figure in when we are acquainted to the Bible and the meaning of all of those. And Jesus says that about his mother. Who is my mother? Well, it's very similar to the previous passage because Jesus, points to his disciple right there and he says, "Here are my mother and here are my brothers." And he brings the idea, number one, that we shall not just honor the biological father and mother, we should embrace that universal family, those who are with us that came in this divine planning that put us in a certain place at a certain time to do things and to learn what we need to learn. Does this make sense to you? Well, I wanted to pause, and this may take about a couple of minutes, but I wanted to just read or tell, narrate something that I think it just struck a chord to me, right? And it's because I read recently the story of Saint Francis of Assisi, and his story keeps coming back in so many different teachings. So if you have not heard about it, here it goes very quickly, just not the whole story, of course. But Francis was a son of a very wealthy merchant in Assisi, and he had a great ambition. And this is important. That's his desire, his commitment. He wanted, as a merchant son who was not noble, he wanted to become a knight. And to do that, what would you do in the 13th century? Well, you would do this through the military. So he, through getting to battles, etc., he was able to then ascend to the ranks of the nobleman of the time, and he would give great honor to his mother and father. So what is behind of this? And this is very important for me, again, is the fact that it is within this desire, this ambition, there's also the underneath layer of wanting to be somebody, to be influential, to be respected. Do you understand that? So we have Jesus and a young man here now saying, I want to follow you, Jesus. And he says, let everything and come. And he says, no, 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 I have, excuse me, I have now to bury my father. And on the other hand, excuse me, on the other hand, we have Francis wanting to bring honor to his family through nobility, but it's the desire that we have to question. What is the layer beneath that honoring the father, right? So he, Saint Francis, was, according to what they say, very good looking, very intelligent, very wealthy, very ambitious. And he says, okay, let's do what I want to do, which is bring the title of nobility to my family. And he starts in his very first foray into war. Mind you, very young, just like the young man that came to Jesus. And unfortunately, or dare say, fortunately, right there, he's captured and he spent an entire year in a prison. And it's very interesting, if you ever want to know more and you're not interested in reading a whole book. There's several movies about it, and the scene, I think it was Franco Zeffirelli's scene of him in the prison, the 13th century, is quite remarkable. You have a picture of what I would call hell, to just have nothing and wait for a whole year in terrible, terrible conditions. But anyways, he got sick, his health kept declining. His father finally got him a year later, but got him back home, and he spent pretty much another year in bed. Many would read that as a depression, right? That he went down in the depth of sadness and depression that year. Some people say this is the moment that he wakes up. Regardless of that, when he finally started to wake up to life again, right? He looked and life was no longer the same. It's almost that he had fragmented his desire, his needs, and all that was once so alluring to him no longer was. What was now stimulating to him was nature, was love, was this he, but he wanted to do something, and that initial desire to be influential dissipated. That's not the way. So he answered another call to arms, and this time he joins the um, papacy, right? They had forces in the south of Rome to fight. And at that point, in a dream, this is quite interesting. He hears a voice that says, "Francis, who is it better to serve, the Lord or the servant?" And he says, "The Lord, of course." And this voice that we think it is God or Jesus, right? He says, "Then why are you serving the servant?" And folks, this is beautiful. Why do we choose? This is for us to serve the servants of the Lord, the servants of God. In this case, was very clear, right? So to wrap it up, St. Francis, in this epiphany, he realizes, oh my goodness, he had it all wrong. Oh, spoiler alert, he got wrong yet again, right? But he goes back to Assisi, he abandons everything. He heard that he needs to rebuild the church, and he starts to actually building, right? Rock. He does not understand the higher calling. He rebuilds the church of San Damiano with his own hands, and he prays, and he wants to enlighten himself. He has this thing going on, and but this is a story that is quite beautiful, because it is about how he embraced himself in all the ways that he could, that he then, and this is deep into psychological analysis, right? But he lets go of his ego, his desire to have the external world applaud him through the titles of nobility. He says, no, I want to be a servant to our Lord. And that's how he frees himself, and he becomes the Saint Francis that we know. And this reference to me gives a reflection to the entire chapter 11 of this book, because we have to ask ourselves, are we mistakenly following those that should be followers instead of those that are our models? Have we ever thought about uh, what are we doing? How are we honoring? Are we working for the wrong purpose, the wrong person, the wrong idea? And so this chapter is an invitation to all of us to look deeply into ourselves and see, where are we investing, say, our energy, our youth, our curiosity, our life. Joanna explains that, back to Jesus' passage, right? That his attitude in the proposal to this young man, this son, who only meant to fulfill his immediate duty, right? It is so strange to all of us. But she adds, it is possible that Jesus knew his real intention, right? That this young son was actually postponing his calling, his commitment, his endeavor to become enlightened. And we open here this idea that by bearing his father, he's actually maybe hiding other things, what is below the surfaces. So for us, it's really a question as we read this chapter: what are our intentions, our true intentions, our commitments, our needs, and what are we hiding? So when we look here in terms of this passage, we find the notion of, could it be pride? So let's think about, for this young man, he had this deep desire, right, an urgent desire to go to the funeral and the burial of the dead body. And it may mean many different things. For example, he did this out of love and honor on one hand, or on the other hand, he could have just meaning that he was actually concerned with the appearance of, in reputation and vanity, pride, to be seen as a faithful, loving son. And perhaps Joanna says that to us. Perhaps it could be that he needed to be accepted or recognized as someone who was deserving of his inheritance. Oh boy. So who knows, right? There could be some disposition of the time that required him to carry on this final duty as a child, as a son, or else he would lose his inheritance. I don't know. But if it's the case, this work that he needed to do, this commitment he needed to do that interfered from following Jesus, really show an ulterior motive versus an act of love. But it's interesting, right? Because we know how ironic it is for someone, and we look now here with 2,000 years later, what are the chances that you and I could have been that young man, had the chance to do the most amazing thing in life, to follow, to walk by one of the most pure spirit, to walk on earth, to live on earth, and we're right there, being able to just soak up all of that energy and love and transcendence, and we say nope, I got to do this first. So, anyways, if the goal of this young man was to just get his inheritance, we know actually that despite the usefulness of any material possessions that his inheritance would give to them, why? Well, especially the time, they will promote a sense of stability, safety, security, comfort, progress, peace, and we also know if used correctly, right? But let us never forget that material possessions can become our shackles, our prisons, right? They can really lead us to a lifeless life. And this is especially important when we consider the eternal truths, right? The light that comes in our road toward our enlightenment and our spiritual growth. But as I keep moving into this discussion, the other aspect that comes to subtext that comes to us is the fact that power, right? Power may be the reason why he did what he did. And one might guess the young man, he was quite young and unwilling to renounce what he already had. And that's exactly what Jesus asked him to do. Renounce, let the dead bury the dead. This is not your duty. And he used that as an excuse. And it's unacceptable. This is very important for us to understand, right? Acceptable way to commit to a different commitment and to avoid what was his real commitment. So let's think about it. Power can be often in our lives correlated to financial success. And we can remember that the material pleasures, right, material access to material items are truly powerful chains that will bind us and will push us to having a perspective that is focused on primitive, right, sensorial needs, and they really can dilute and remove and even kill our ideals. So I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about the Swiss depth psychology founder Carl Jung, and he wrote something very interesting. He wrote about love, right? So he said that, and we logically think that the opposite of love is what? Hate. Some people think it is indifference, but psychologically, and Carl Gustav Jung says the opposite of love is the will to power, right? And he says where love flourish, where love is the largest force, there is no will to power. There's no need to power. We have love. But he also says when the will to power is the strongest force, then there is no love either. So if you think about it from this angle, there are two kinds of suffering, right? The suffering that comes and imposed to us from the outside world, and suffering from within. And when suffering is imposed from the outside, we can decide what to do with, how to share it. How do you share the suffering with our closest one, or if we can see those who are hurting, we can choose to show compassion, love, empathy. So it's all about love. But Jung tells us as well, this is all Jung here, he tells us that suffering, when it is created by ourselves, it is known in psychology as neurotic suffering, or he calls inauthentic suffering. If we break this down, we find that when we feel symptoms, neurotic, anxiety, depression, compulsion, even somatizing our body with ulcers, headaches, etc., they usually primarily happen because we are trying to manipulate people because of our desire to be powerful. Who? How do we do this? Well, if we do it many, many different ways, but if we think from an emotional perspective, right, we can do this manipulation by whatever's happening, we blame the other, or we withhold our feelings and affection, or we manipulate by using things like guilt tripping the others, and through that we make them do what they do. We have temper tantrums, we whatever it is, we abuse power. So once again, the opposite of love is power, not hatred. And we think that the young man, right, um, his calling was postponed, avoided, or missed altogether, right? We, like him, may may not be able to do that. And when power uh, wins, right? What happens when it loses? Our desire for power loses, and we are using love instead. We may be able to seek and find a fulfilled life, right? So on one hand, if we ignore them, this thirst for power, we may have a fulfilled life. But if we sink into it, we may have actually a meaningless, cynical, a life of hoarding, loneliness, or even alienation. And he finally says, this is from Jung, he says, the dragon we must slay is no more than the monster of everyday expectations about how we ought to live our lives. Let me read that again. The dragon we must slay is no more than the monster of everyday expectations about how we ought to live our lives. So if we realize that, we will go back in the world and we're no longer of the world, right, will be able to interact with others without submitting to their definitions of who we are supposed to be. And this is really a treasure, like a pearl of knowledge, because once we find that, we find that by consciously choosing to pursue our inner journey, we are able to transform this personal fate into our personal identity. So I stop here and just want to say to you, this passage by Joanna de Angelis, she goes to many different discussions about why did this man not follow Jesus? Was it fear? And why is it fear important? Was this exercise of free will? And yes, it's his to use, right? And or was it a calling that he really did not hear? He did not see in his own in yourself to follow, or we come to this discussion regardless of what this man did or did not do. The time is now, right? The time is now for us to really hear the calling and let ourselves be enlightened by our life. So, with that, I want to say that I hope you can read this chapter. Let me know your thoughts, and I hope it inspires you to really begin each day with love and the courage to fulfill your commitment, your calling. So I want to say thank you, and I'll see you next week when we talk about responsibilities. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful day.